Hello, this presentation is on the Great Dyke of Zimbabwe, specifically focusing on the petrogenesis, geology, and model. Firstly, let's answer the question of what is a dike? A dike is a tabular cross-cutting intrusion that intrudes through pre-existing country rocks. Most dikes are igneous intrusions formed from magma filling pre-existing fractures in host rocks. However, some dikes are formed through sedimentary processes, creating clastic dikes, which are more rare. The Great Dyke of Zimbabwe is a layered mafic and ultramafic igneous metal-bearing intrusion in the Zimbabwe craton that cuts across Archean host rocks. The Great Dyke cuts through the center of Zimbabwe from the northeast to southwest, covering 550 kilometers in length and is 3 to 12 kilometers in width. The Great Dyke mainly consists of two major chambers, the north and south, and the four subchambers. The Great Dyke creation can be attributed to a major magmatic event that marks the Archean Proterozoic boundary in that province. Uranium-lead, rubidium-strontium, lead-lead, and samarium-neodymium age determinations have been conducted on the Great Dyke, and NASA has stated that the dike is estimated to be approximately 2.5 billion years old. It is known to be the first magmatic event in the stabilized Zimbabwe craton. So this image is kind of just outlining the location of the Great Dyke. As you can see, it's kind of on the eastern side of Africa, and it cuts across basically the entirety of the center of Zimbabwe. It's a pretty large intrusion here. You can see how there's a bunch of different subsections here, which we'll get into later with some further maps that are more detailed. So the Great Dyke shape is kind of linear and elongated. It's a vertical sheet with a dip of approximately 90 degrees and appears triangular in cross-section, almost boat-like. And in this cross-section, you can kind of see characteristic layers here with mafic rock and ultramafic rock with chromite layers. Later we'll kind of see a more detailed cross-section, but this gives like a good overview of the boat shape of this intrusion. The cross-sectional shape seen on the previous slide reflects the rise of the dike, rising along deep faults created by the extension of the African crust due to the African rift system. So here on this map, the dike would kind of be off the zoomed in map here, probably down below around this area, so we can't really see where it is, but this map just kind of well shows the East African rift zone, things kind of pulling apart, extension happening, and this creating fractures in areas for the dike to likely rise up and form. This is a cross-sectional kind of elongate view of the Great Dyke, going from the north to the south. You can see the more southern area. It has a lot of orthoperoxenites within the ultramafic sequence, which is going to be kind of encasing the mafic sequence on top. And we're going to be focusing in on this area for kind of mineral and geology composition, as there's a lot of mines, such as the Anuki mine in that area, mining for specific minerals and things that we're able to form in this dike. So a basic overview of the mineral composition is gold, silver, chromium, platinum, nickel, asbestos, and tin minerals that are found within this Great Dyke that are extremely useful when extracted, very valuable minerals. You can see some thin sections here. These samples were taken in the stratigraphically topmost area of the Anuki mine mentioned earlier. Polysynthetic twinned plagioclase occurs here in association with cloudy altered clinopyroxene. We can see fine to medium grained euhedral and subhedral chromite crystals that occur enclosed in differently oriented plagioclase. We can also see orthoperoxene that occurs with intercumulus sulfides, and amphibole can also be identified in these samples here. We can see a couple of geological sections of the Great Dyke. So on this side here, on the more western part of the dike, there is a geological section of a block in the Snake's Head deposit. We can see characteristic layering of orthoperoxenites, which is this kind of crosshatch stuff here, and then olivine peroxenite, which are kind of smaller layers between the orthoperoxenites. And characteristic layering continues over to the stratigraphy of an ultramafic sequence within the Dar-Wendell subchamber in the western marginal facies here. We can see layering of orthoperoxenite and hasbergite in these sequences here, and the layering of this intrusion is very important to how this dike was formed. Do a brief refresher on how typical igneous dikes form. Essentially, these dikes form when magma rises into existing fractures or forces itself through existing rocks. This 2.5 billion year old Great Dyke is extremely large and characteristically layered, an elongate igneous intrusion that was comprised due to a series of linked magma chambers activated by fracturing tectonic activity. The igneous intrusion first developed from isolated chambers, which eventually linked as the magma filling progress continued. The characteristic cyclic units within the ultramafic sequence, as we can see here, the ultramafic sequence, lots of characteristic layering, are due to the interplay of crystallization and magma emplacement. Initially, the magma of the Great Dyke was rich in magnesium and silica with low concentration strontium isotopes, which indicates low crustal contamination. And as the magma ascended, it became more contaminated. So for those of us who don't know, crustal contamination is the process of incorporation of chemical components in basaltic magma of continental crust as it traverses up. So as the magma ascended, continued fracturing of the wall and roof rocks occurred and placed itself within the magma body, incorporating these detached blocks into the magma. The chromite layers in the Great Dyke formed due to this process of emplacement that continued as a result of magma mixing as the chambers expanded. Then, base metal sulfides enriched in platinum group elements formed as continued influx of magma and fractionation occurred. Next, we're going to be going through a few models, a few maps of the Great Dyke from various scientific journals, various scientific papers. So first we have a map of the Great Dyke in the Zimbabwe Archean Craton. So we can see the major fracture pattern here with the dashed lines and the ultramafic sequences in purple, which kind of boat-like encases the mafic sequence. So remember, the ultramafic sequence was extremely layered, with the mafic sequence kind of resting on top, kind of dipped within that. Earlier in this slide, we talked about the multiple subchambers, and we just talked about the mixing of magma in different chambers, creating this giant dike thing. So we have our 4 main subchambers, and then our 2 major chambers here that we touched on briefly earlier. And I want to draw your attention to the Anuki mine over here, this Shurugwi subchamber. Sorry if I butchered that, but this Anuki mine here, this is where we figured out kind of mineral compositions. We looked at a few thin sections from this area. So just note that it's kind of in this south chamber here. And yeah, so this is just kind of a basic overview of the dike and its basic ultramafic and mafic sequence. So here we have a couple more maps and models. So on this side here we have a mine map for the Anuki mine. So this kind of shows the geology of the north central zone of the Shirogui subchamber that has a good overview of the geology of the dike. So we can see the ultramafic and mafic sequence here, the mafic sequence in green and the ultramafic sequence in purple. And also here we can see the greenstone belts. So in these two images here, we can see the greenstone belts. So the greenstones in this A side will be the yellows and the purples. And over here, the greenstone belt marginal rocks are going to be this green stuff here. So looking at this kind of more simplified map here, we can see the greenstone belt sequences in the contact of the subchamber. So these green belts are sequences of metamorphic mafic to ultramafic rocks that make up an ancient volcanic sequence. These sequences here are associated with Archean and Proterozoic cratons, in which sedimentary basins often intruded upon by granitic plutons along the border. And on the side, we see a more detailed map here of just this little area of the Inuki block, and we can see the many dashed lines that show the different faults and orientations within that small area. And then on the other side, we have seen this image before earlier on, but we're going to go in deeper depth here. So we see the layering within the ultramafic sequence and the mafic sequence on top, and kind of more going into the lithology and a stratigraphic column down here. So this image labeled shows the transverse section of the Great Dyke, displaying the relationship present. The boat-like structure has, as we've mentioned multiple times before, the lower ultramafic zone here and the upper mafic zone. The picture shows repeating layering in the ultramafic sequence with repeated layers of dunites, hasbrogites, bronzitites, and pyroxenite with layers of chromite, which is very valuable to be mined. So we can see this here and here. And yeah, so this is a great overview of the south chamber. The stars in this indicate the identified lithology where samples were taken in the stratigraphic section to identify these rocks present here. Thank you for listening to this presentation. So here we're just going to go through the references, kind of touches on the models, the references of the models, the images, all the great maps that we found through this presentation and referred to, and where all the information came from. Continuing on to another page of references, the last page of references. Again, thank you so much for listening. I hope you have a great day.